All right. I see that people are starting to join us. I'm so glad to welcome you all here to our conversation with Sarah Hurwitz as part of AJU's B'Yachad Together offerings. It's really wonderful to see so many people here. I'm watching the number go up on the side of my screen. Right now it's 419 and quickly rising. Pretty amazing. So welcome all of you. I'm Rabbi Adam Greenwald, the Vice President for Jewish Engagement at American Jewish University. And Sarah, it is just such a pleasure and an honor to get to speak with you. I love your book here all along. It captures so much really rich, authentic Jewish wisdom and this incredibly high bar of Jewish ethics and this rich sense of what Jewish spirituality can offer. I've been recommending it to many of my Intro to Judaism students, some of whose names I see on the side of the screen. And I love that you are really inviting all of us to come along on a journey with you. So
thank you so much. Oh, thank you for having me. This is such a great program. I'm thrilled to be here. And I mean, Adam, you were doing such great work to, reach out to, welcome in, provide education for so many people. So I'm a huge fan, and I'm really thrilled to be here with you tonight.
Well, then it's a mutual admiration society. I am absolutely thrilled to get to see you here. And we're going to spend most of tonight talking about the ideas in your book here all along. But first, you had this unbelievable privilege to work for one of my forever heroes, Michelle Obama and her husband, but really Michelle Obama. I would love to hear, how did you wind up in the Obama White House? Tell us that story.
So I actually wound up there through a series of failures. My first job I started as an intern in the summer of 1998 in Vice President Al Gore's speechwriting office. And the writers I worked for helped me get my first two jobs out of college, both of which were failures. The second one actually was a speechwriting job for a senator, and his chief of staff actually sat me down and said, "I hear you've applied for law school. Yeah, you should go." So I wasn't subtle. I took the hints, went to law school, thinking done with speechwriting. And my third week of class, I met a guy named Josh Gottheimer, who is now a congressman from New Jersey. But back then, he was a law school classmate, and he'd previously written speeches for President Clinton. And the two of us just started freelancing together. And we got jobs working on General Wesley Clark's primary campaign in 2003, and Clark lost. We got jobs on John Kerry's campaign in 2004, and Kerry lost. I got a job in 2008 as Hillary Clinton's chief speechwriter on her campaign in 2008, and she too lost. So, this isn't a great track record so far, but fortunately I got hired on the Obama campaign in 2008, and I was there to write for him, but I helped Mrs. Obama with her Democratic convention speech. And so when he won, which was a new experience for me, we went to the White House, and I wrote for him for about a year and a half, 2 years. But I actually realized I missed writing for her, and I kind of liked writing for her better. So in I think a surprising White House career move, particularly probably to President Obama, I switched from writing from him to writing for her. And she was a joy. I mean, this is a woman who knows who she is. She always knows what she wants to say. And writing for her just involves sitting down and asking her, what do you want to say in this speech? And she would just dictate paragraphs and paragraphs of beautiful, vivid, edgy, moving language, ideas, stories. And I would type as fast as possible, verbatim, on my laptop, because I really wanted to capture what she was saying. And that would really be the beating heart of my draft. I'd send it around to colleagues in the White House, lawyers, fact checkers, policy experts. So we were really very concerned with making sure that everything she and the president said was accurate, true, the right thing to be saying. And then I would send it to her, and she would just edit and edit and edit. She had very high technical standards for her speeches, and then she would deliver them. So it was, when people say, oh, you scripted her, or you put words in her mouth, it's like, no, have you seen this woman? No one puts words in Michelle Obama's mouth. She was really the other way around. So it was a joy.
Was there something about her voice that you feel like really matched you and your values? It's such an interesting move to go from writing for the President of the United States to writing for the First Lady. What was it about her voice that made that the right move?
I think it was more the role of first lady. The president is the commander in chief and the ultimate first responder. So that person is dealing with every policy crises and all these policy crises. And he was spending the first 2 years of the administration talking about the economy. And that was just speech after speech. Whereas a first lady is not elected by anyone. She's not the first responder. So the first lady or first spouse, really, they carve out kind of issues that they're interested in. So I was actually very interested in the issues she was working on. And I also think the first lady can have a more conversational voice, a more personal voice. And I kind of liked the informality and the kind of personal nature of Mrs. Obama's voice. It felt more similar to mine than the president's. So it just felt like a better fit.
Mm. I remember that 2008 DNC speech, just so beautifully interweaving the personal and the big ideas. That was a wonderful speech to have been a part of.
It was a lot of fun to work on.
So you spent these years in the Obama White House, and you tell the story in your book about, as time is coming to a close, overhearing a group of other staffers talking about the afterlife. And I guess you were already on this sort of Jewish learning journey, and you walked over to them and said, "Oh, cool, the afterlife. Can we talk about the afterlife and God?" And they said, "No, we mean like what we're going to do come January." Right? Your afterlife was to write a book on Jewish wisdom. How did you move from White House speechwriting to Jewish author?
Yeah, it was not most people did not regard that as a logical next step, which I understand. I grew up maybe like many of you watching tonight, where, Judaism for me was 2 dull services at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and a very long and dull Seder at Passover. And by the time I became a bat mitzvah, I just figured, okay, enough, I'm done, right? I've checked this box. I'm a cultural Jew, or maybe I'm Jewish by heritage. Whatever, but I don't have to do Judaism. If I want to find meaning or spirituality or something really deep, it's obviously not here in Judaism. I'll have to look elsewhere. So I disengaged from Judaism. Then fast forward about 25 years, at the age of 36, I broke up with this guy I'd been dating, and I just had a lot of time on my hands, and I was looking for things to do. And I happened to hear about an Intro to Judaism class at the local JCC. And I signed up on a whim. I was not in some existential crisis or some profound spiritual journey. It really could have been a karate class or, a painting class. I just thought, okay, sure, Judaism. I know nothing about my heritage. I should learn something. So I went to this class, and I was blown away by what I found. I found so much wisdom about what it means to be human, about how to live a good life, about how to be a really decent person, about how to find profound adult spiritual connection. And, if you're a Jew like me and your only points of contact with Judaism are 3 mediocre holidays, you don't realize that Judaism has all of this ethical, spiritual, human wisdom in it. Those points of contact aren't necessarily our most kind of accessible work. So I started learning. I took another intro class. I read hundreds of books. I started attending week-long silent meditation retreats. And, what I found was that there were these excellent intro books that really covered the basics and the how-to. And then there are some excellent, although largely impenetrable, very specific academic books that, it's like 1,000 pages on this tiny little Jewish thing. And, if you have the patience and some real will of steel, you too can get the wisdom that they offer. But there really wasn't anything that, covered the basics while at the same time trying to translate some of this deeper, edgy wisdom for Jews like me who are, thoughtful and smart, but just don't have a lot of Jewish learning. So that was the book. And it's been interesting to see how originally I thought my book was going to be for disengaged Jews, but I've been getting such enthusiastic feedback from very, very observant Jews who will actually say to me, look, don't agree with everything you write, but I actually learned a lot from your book, right? It's a totally fresh perspective. I haven't thought of things this way before. I see you have 550 endnotes, so you've clearly done your homework. And, I appreciate that you love Judaism as much as I do. So that has been very gratifying.
I'm sure. In thinking about this sort of edgy, what you call the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
A lot of what you write about is ethics. And Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, who I know we both really adore,
Love him. Adore him.
Right, talks a lot about how a lot of people think of ritual as the meat of religion, and ethics are the extracurriculars, right? Religion
Right.
is about what you do and don't eat, or what you do and don't do on Saturday, and being a good person is a lovely extra. But you write in the book, really picking up on that theme, that one of the things that most impressed you and most moved you about your Jewish study was encountering these really high ethical bars that Jewish texts set, and starting to look at yourself in a more self-critical way than perhaps you'd been invited to in the past. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as the ethical wisdom in Judaism, and how it challenged you, and how it's good for the rest of us?
Yeah, I love the point you make about Rabbi Taleshkin, who is just an extraordinary writer and human being. I could not be a bigger fan of his work. It's funny. The last I checked, there were 613 mitzvot, or Jewish, core Jewish laws, and
I got that
you
number
know,
too.
they're not. Some of them are ethical and some of them are ritual. And I think it's so interesting that when someone wants to figure out if I'm observant, they will ask me. They'll want to know: do I keep kosher? Do I observe Shabbat? How often do I go to a synagogue? They don't ask me, do I conduct my business affairs honestly? Am I careful with my speech? Do I give a lot of money for tzedakah? They don't, and it's interesting because they're all mitzvot. So why do certain ones define observant? It's strange to me. But in terms of ethics, I think I always thought, I'm a good person, right? Like I don't lie, cheat, or steal. I'm nice, whatever that means. And studying Jewish ethics made me realize what a low bar that is. I think many of us are steeped in this kind of American culture where the dominant secular ethic is you do you as long as you don't hurt others.
Right.
And where the ethic of American law is very much, don't assault people, don't steal their property, and don't infringe on their rights. But other than that, do what you want. There isn't much said about compassion, kindness, honesty, generosity, wisdom, maturity. There's a lot of values that our secular society doesn't really capture, but that I found in Jewish law. And, studying the laws of speech were incredibly sobering to me. I would have thought before that, I don't gossip. I'm not a big gossip. I don't shame people. That's terrible. I do both things. Studying Jewish law, I realized the number of times I just pass along a piece of information, or that I'm in a debate with someone and I just want to get them. And so I frame my argument in a way that makes them, that kind of humiliates them a little bit because I really want to win it. It's like, is that necessary? Even a situation as simple as if the two of us are colleagues and we get into a fight one afternoon and I go home that night, I'm so angry at you. And so I call a bunch of friends, like, Adam, he's the worst. He's bad at his job. He's dishonest. He's not smart. I don't trust the guy. He's lazy. And then I feel better. Got it off my chest. I come back to work the next day and we make up. It's total misunderstanding. Well, small problem. I've just told a bunch of people some pretty negative things about you. And maybe they've told other people who've told other people. Maybe a month from now, you apply for a job at a company that, one of those people actually happens to work in HR. And they say, I remember hearing something about that guy. You know what? Let's hold. I think there might be some integrity or work ethic issues. It's like our words can ruin people's lives. So certainly speech, very sobering. I also think just the Jewish ethic around chesed, which means loving kindness. I was very moved by the level of physical presence that chesed demands. When someone is sick or in mourning, we don't say, well, just send a get well card, send some flowers. We say, get yourself to their bedside, get yourself to that funeral and that shiva. Now, we cannot do that now in a time of physical distancing. That is not safe and not acceptable. But, that ministry of presence, as chaplains call it, that is still demanded of us. How can we be just deeply, profoundly present for people, whether it's by phone, over Zoom? I'm very moved by that requirement of presence, which is it's pretty countercultural, actually, in a time in which even before this, we were doing so much by email, text, everything like that. I think it's very powerful.
Yeah, we think of religious people often as the ones who are the first to send thoughts and prayers, right? Whenever something goes wrong, whenever somebody's in a hard time, sending you thoughts and prayers. And Judaism really sets the bar so much higher. One of my teachers, Rabbi Sharon Brous, likes to say, err on the side of presence. Like if
Yes.
you're going to mess up by being too present rather than too removed. And that is countercultural to step in to other people in the midst of their grief and their pain, rather than pulling away and maybe giving them space.
Exactly. Exactly. It's very countercultural. And there's a beautiful story from the Talmud, an ancient Jewish commentary that I absolutely love, and I've been sharing it a lot, about three rabbis. And it's, some of you may know it. Rabbi A gets sick, and then Rabbi B shows up, takes his hand and heals him. Then Rabbi B gets sick, and Rabbi C shows up, takes Rabbi B's hand and heals him. And the question is, wait a second, if Rabbi B could heal Rabbi A, why didn't Rabbi B just heal himself? Why did he need Rabbi C to show up and heal him? And the answer is that the prisoner cannot get himself out of prison. Yeah. Like, we all become imprisoned in our own anxiety, fear, isolation, sadness. And even if you are really good at consoling Rabbi B or Rabbi A, you do need Rabbi C to come and break you out of your own prison. And I think a lot of us today are Rabbi B, trying to kind of keep it together for our loved ones, but really in need of support. So I think that is just a profound story about the power of presence. And you can reach out and take someone's hand over Zoom, over the phone, metaphorically. Don't do it in person.
I love that story too. For all of you who joined us a couple of minutes into this session, or what we call Jewish Standard Time, you are watching Biyachad Together, spirited by American Jewish University, in conversation with Sarah Hurwitz. I'm Rabbi Adam Greenwald. I want to welcome you all here. There is a Q&A function in the webinar, which allows you to ask questions. We're going to be posing some of those questions to Sarah as the night goes on. Please do put your questions in there, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. By the way, you may have in other Zooms used the chat for this. If you can keep all those questions in the Q&A, that would be perfect, just so that they're all in one place and we can see them as we go. I'll ask you just a first question, which appeared in the Q&A that I was going to wait till the end, but I felt really apropos here. Mark writes about what were the leadership qualities in the teachers that you encountered in this Intro to Judaism class that opened up this material for you, right? That the material is wonderful, but the delivery person matters too. What was it?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And it actually really wasn't particular to that particular teacher. It actually really was the material. More than anything else. And I've had so many amazing Jewish teachers who really have taught me so much, but I think in this case, it was the material. It was seeing these texts for the first time as an adult and realizing that there was actually something here that was far more sophisticated than than what I learned as a kid. And because I was a kid, right? It was for a child's mind, not for an adult. So I think in that case, it really was the material. But in terms of teachers I've had over the years, I think that it's really helpful to have a teacher who can control the class, right? Who can really convey a lot of substance and kind of not let it just devolve into kind of a lot of chit chat, which I think sometimes tends to happen in Jewish spaces. I think that's important. I also just think a teacher who lives what they're teaching. And that's, seeing so many of my teachers, really all of the teachers who I love, who just hold themselves to such a high ethical bar in terms of how they live their lives, that has been really inspiring to me as well.
Yeah, you tell a story in the first chapter of your book about, you said, breaking 2 of the 10 commandments, dishonoring your parents and bearing false witness, kind of manipulating them into getting you out of a Hebrew school that you found boring, and God got you by putting you in a Hebrew school that was even more boring than the one that you left. So I do want to ask you, how have we fallen short in Jewish education that we're giving to kids? These are big and complicated ideas that we're talking about, and they're hard to communicate to little people. But is there a way, in your opinion, that we could be doing a better job of starting young Jewish lives out to ask the kind of questions and have the kind of curiosity that you had to discover in your 30s?
I have no idea. I'm not a parent. I'm not an educator. I actually don't even, I would even gently push back on that being the question. I don't think that's the question at all. I don't think Hebrew school is the problem. I think the problem is, and I'm speaking of myself 7 years ago and throughout my life, the problem is that many of us stopped learning at age 13. 20 years later, we have kids and we think, well, someone's got to make this kid Jewish. Sure, not going to be me because I don't know anything. I know, I'll dump the entire project of making my kid Jewish on some educators and rabbis, and I'll give them 2 hours a week, and then I'll get mad at them and say they're not doing a good job. That's not acceptable, right? I think the number one challenge that we face as a Jewish people is literacy. Many of us, and again, I'm speaking of myself, I didn't know what the Torah was 6 or 7 years ago. I knew it was the thing on the scrolls. It was important. It was in Hebrew. It was old. That's kind of important. That's sort of our core sacred text. I didn't know its plot. I didn't know its key animating ideas. The Talmud, never heard of it. Those are the commentaries through which we interpreted the Torah. Very, very important. Didn't know any of that. So I think that, when you're when you know as little as I do, you can certainly have Jewish experiences. You can show up for services, you can do things, but they feel thin and they feel kind of weird and off-putting because you don't really know what you're doing. And so I think that, I don't think that trashing Hebrew school or Hebrew school teachers is the answer. I think they're actually doing a great job given what we dump on them. I think the answer is that we have to grow up and become Jewish adults ourselves. And, I wrote my book because I knew there were those kind of intro nuts and bolts books out there, but I knew that that's really not something I would have read. I really wanted, I think that when I first started out, I wanted something that was deep and edgy and that would convey to me the really transformative insights of Judaism, but also cover the basics at the same time going along. So that's part of the why I wrote my book.
I totally agree with you, right? These, there are wonderful educators out there who are doing their very best to keep a group of 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds engaged in an after-school Hebrew school program in between soccer practice and the hours of homework that they're being assigned. And they're still managing to inspire love of Judaism for a lot of kids. And they're very much deserving of our respect.
Yes.
But I do think there is one way in which it feels that we haven't done enough, which is around teaching Jews from a young age onward to have a variety of ways to be able to plug in to this God concept. I think there are a lot of kids who get the message early on that God is somewhere between Santa Claus and angry dad in the sky. And as soon as they reach an age to start to question that, they assume that must mean, I don't believe in God. I can't have a God language that works for me. You have been on a real journey with God. What have you found in that journey?
You've beautifully described my exact experience with God. Like the idea that God is a being in the sky who controls everything and rewards us and punishes us as we deserve. Didn't buy it at age 9, don't buy it now, never have, never will. So I really thought for most of my life that meant, okay, I must be an atheist, right? Or maybe I'm spiritual but not religious, whatever that means. That's not actually what Judaism says about God. It's really not. When I actually started studying Jewish theology, I realized that we as Jews have this wonderful humility when it comes to God. We do not have some universally accepted dogma or definition or doctrine of God where we say God is this, because I think that we understand that we are talking about something so vast, so beyond the capacity of our human minds to perfectly categorize or explain, that to even try to do so really is a form of idolatry. And I appreciate that humility because honestly, when people start saying what God is and what God wants, generally doesn't go very well. So I appreciate that instead of doctrine, what we have are centuries worth of thinkers, theologians, other Jews just articulating their experiences of the divine and coming up with conceptions based on those experiences. So you have the mystics who say that everything is God. You're all God, I'm God. The idea that there's any barrier between us, that's an illusion. So when I walk by someone on the street who says, hey, can you help me? Can you spare $1? That person is God, right? That person is a manifestation of the divine. It's a pretty powerful way to think. There's Martin Buber, a Jewish thinker, who says God is what arises between two human beings who are being fully vulnerable to each other, fully understanding and seeing each other's humanity. What arises between them in those moments of relation is God. There is Mordecai Kaplan, who says that God is the process by which we each become our highest and truest selves. Right? None of these is a man in the sky. And there's Rabbi R. Green, whose writing I love. He has this beautiful passage about where he says, think about the moment your child was born. Your parent took their last breath. You were standing out in nature, overwhelmed by your tininess in the night sky, or you were just blown away by a piece of art or music or swept away in a moment of deep connection. And he says, we all have these moments that feel unique. They feel transcendent. It's like, can we start by thinking of the divine in those moments? And I will say, I went on my first silent Jewish meditation retreat years ago. I was very skeptical. I'm pretty hard-headed about things, and it was called Awakening the Divine, which I thought was a very silly name, but I I went, and it turned out to be this transformative experience where through days of meditation and prayer, my mind quieted down, and I really felt like I touched into something that I'm terrible at articulating. If I were to try to articulate it, I would tell you it feels like the animating source of all life. It feels like an actualizing, growth-inducing force. It feels like when I experience it, it feels like boundless love. And while I certainly don't think it as a being, I relate to it as a you, because I need relation. That's all, but none of that makes sense. I can't defend that in a court of law. My law degree would not be helpful to me in this moment, but that's okay. We have the humility to say, like, look, we can't be articulate about this because it's much bigger than us. So I think that combination of, realizing that there's all of this Jewish thinking and articulating these experiences that are not just a man in the sky, and actually being to have my own experiences really helped me get beyond that kind of man-shaped kind of God.
Mm, mm. I'm wondering, there are a few questions in the chat, including one from my mother, so if I ignore it, I will have hell to pay.
Gotta take mom's question.
Yeah, exactly. About the intersection between this Jewish journeying and your time working for the Obamas. And, I think both of them are people of deep faith and people who brought faith into their messages of hope and uplift for the American people. I think about that moment that, may make me tear up on this webinar of President Obama standing in the church singing Amazing Grace in the aftermath of the shooting in Charleston, and many other examples. I'm wondering if your experience writing for, sharing the voice of the Obamas helped you at all to articulate your own voice of faith?
Yeah, it did. And it's funny, when I think of the Obamas, when I was first learning about Judaism and working for Mrs. Obama, I began to realize that what I think of as the core animating Jewish idea, that we're all created in the image of God, I realized that actually every speech I was writing for her and for him, they were both articulating that idea over and over again. If you unpack this idea, which is, it's based on a verse from the Torah, that we're all created in the image of God. I don't care if you believe in any kind of God, really not relevant. I think Yitz Greenberg speaks so beautifully about this idea, and he's drawing on ancient Jewish texts. He says that with the idea that we're created in the divine image means that each of us is infinitely worthy. We are all totally equal to each other, and each of us is unique. There's no one else like us. Yeah. And you can say, well, yeah, Sarah, obviously we all believe that. No, we don't. You don't believe that? I don't believe that. No one on this call really believes that. Or else that person on the street who asked me for help, I would never walk by that person and just say, oh, I'm sorry, sir, not today, and keep walking. Because what if that had been a celebrity, a famous person? Of course I would have stopped and said, oh my, wow, celebrity, I know who you are. Like, of course, what do you need? Even if it had been a laptop on the street, I think many of us would have stopped. So we actually don't believe that people are fundamentally, infinitely worthy, equal, and unique. We value people differently based on their status, their wealth, their beauty, their fame. And I think the Obamas were constantly articulating this idea that no, actually, whether they were talking about, educating girls in developing countries or helping kids here in the US get to college or whatever it was, they were saying every single one of the people we're talking about is infinitely worthy. They're equal to everyone else on this planet, and they have a unique world of potential to offer us. So I think that was sort of the spiritual message that infused their work in the world. And I felt like I was helping them articulate that in every speech that I wrote.
Missed that.
Me too.
So, kind of bringing together a lot of the threads that we've been talking about what you've learned about the depth of Jewish wisdom and practice, and about spirituality and about ethics. My colleague, Rabbi Adam Schaefer, in the chat wrote, with the benefit of all you've learned on this journey, if you could go back and talk to 13-year-old Sarah or 18-year-old Sarah or 22-year-old Sarah, what would you want to tell her about Judaism?
Oh, what a great.
And about life.
Sorry?
And about life.
And about life. Just saying all the things. It's such a great question. I don't know if there's really anything I could have told 13-year-old Sarah about Judaism that would have been that's a tough one. I would maybe have wanted to talk to her about the Jewish idea of the stranger and what that means and how totally radical that was. In that you look at the Torah, this is a document written in ancient times, and to have 36 times the ancient Israelites being told by God, love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Like, guys, they were still strangers. Like, they were still the strangers of the ancient world. Everyone was attacking them. They were the losers, right? They were not, it's a very odd thing to say to these strangers, hey, you got to be nice to strangers. It's in a way sort of setting them up and there's sort of an implied message that one day you guys actually will be secure and powerful. You will actually have the capacity to decide how strangers among you are treated. So, use the lessons of your own experience. I think I'd want her to know about that. I think in terms of the older Sarah, 18, 22, 23-year-old, I think I would really want her to understand the animating ideas of Judaism. I'd want her to understand some core ethical ideas. I'd want her to understand the spiritual ideas. I would want her to go on a meditation retreat. And I think what I would be kind of fighting against is, unfortunately, I think that the message in many parts of the Jewish institutional world for many years has been Judaism equals anti-Semitism plus Israel. Like that's Judaism. And, those are two very important topics. Anti-Semitism is a huge, scary, rising problem, right? That's serious. Israel has always been central to Judaism for thousands of years. And today, I know I want to diminish those topics, but what about the other 4,000 years of Judaism? Like, I think a better message for younger Sarah would have been, Sarah, Judaism has profound wisdom for how you can live a meaningful, beautiful life, for how you can be a good person, and for how you can connect to a God that you can actually find plausible. I would want her to know that. And I think this kind of gets at a bigger challenge that we have in Judaism, is that we've sort of leaned into this idea of like peoplehood Judaism, or ethnic Judaism, as some call it, which is nonsense because Jews are every race and ethnicity. So ethnic Judaism that doesn't mean anything. But we've really focused on like feeling Jewish and being part of the people. And that's great. But in America, that's kind of a 3 to 4 generation bet. Not a lot of Americans today are like, I'm a proud Irish American or Italian American or German American. 140 years ago, yes, you were. That was a defining aspect of your identity. And I really worry that now when I hear Jews say, well, I'm a cultural Jew. Oh, my grandma's Jewish. Oh, it's like, what are you? You can't really pass that down. But if your Judaism, like mine was, is basically kind of a vague sense of persecution, also combined with a vague sense of pride and a few recipes for my bubby, and I like Chinese food at New Year's, and I'm funny and anxious and kind of smart, I don't know what I'm passing along. And, how disrespectful to the 4,000 years of extraordinary wisdom that we have, that makes me very sad. So I think I'd want younger Sarah to understand that Judaism isn't just this vague kind of ethnic identity. It's really something so much more.
That connects up with something that's being asked about quite a bit in the chats, which is, so ethnic identity, a vague sense of being neurotic and reading the New York Times with your bagel isn't enough to pass down. But so far, much of our conversation about a God that can be many things to many people, and an ethical standard that's going beyond just being a good person, but really holding ourselves in the light of a very careful approach to what it means to walk in the world. Those things are articulated by other religious traditions, and they are articulated by meaningful secular traditions.
Absolutely.
And one of the critiques can be, okay, so ethics and spirituality may not carry Judaism forward particularly. How do you respond to that?
So it drives me absolutely insane when people say to me, well, social justice is my Judaism. It's like, great, that's also your Christianity, your Islam, your Buddhism, and you're being a decent secular person. That's meaningless, right? We don't own social justice. Every religion has that. We don't own the idea of a divine, right? Every religion has that. But once you start learning at even the lowest and even the most basic elementary level, you realize that we have very, very unique wisdom that is very different from other traditions, and they all have their own wisdom. I don't know none of them are better or worse, but ours are really, it is distinctive, it is unique, and it is different. So I really, if you're saying, well, everyone believes in God, everyone thinks you should be good. Yeah, but that's like the 1 million foot level. You got to go down to like 100,000 feet, 30,000 feet. I'd love it if you could actually come to earth and just be on the ground, really like get into it. I think that's important. But I also think, I'm certainly not like, by saying that I care a lot about ethics and spirituality, I mean, I also think our holidays, our life cycle rituals, our history, our culture, that's extremely important. I mean, I in a way, it's like so obvious to me that that's critical to hand down. I wouldn't even articulate it, but that's how we express many of these things, right? We need Jewish institutions. We need, when people say, oh, synagogues are dead, they're dying, forget it. It's like, okay, that's not true. There are many wonderful, thriving synagogues. B, to the extent that there are some that are kind of dissolving, we need other institutions to come in and take their place. We can't pass on Judaism with each of us sitting alone in our homes reading Jewish texts, right? I don't know what that is, but it is not Judaism. So I do think, so I do think that our holidays, our rituals, very important. But I think that when they're kind of done in a very thin way, when it's like, oh, it's Rosh Hashanah, let's make apple and honey teenies, because get it, Rosh Hashanah, or like Yom Kippur, boy, am I hungry. It's like, okay, right, but Yom Kippur is a 25-hour wrenching death meditation. Like, how have we made this just kind of a boring, annoying holiday, right? It's actually really profound. And I think that until we unearth for ourselves those deeper meanings, those really life-transforming, really powerful meanings that have been, there's like thousands of years of crowdsourced wisdom from millions of people. I think until we allow ourselves to dig into that, I do think it's going to be a little thin. And I do think it is kind of this, like, I like bagels in the New York Times. That's not going to be enough.
Which is one of the wonderful gifts of your book, that you really do lead us into serious encounter with these major topics of Judaism. It's not a surface level skim. It is the real rich marrow of what Judaism has to offer. You did say something, though, that pinged a little sadness for me, which was, you said it's not enough to be sitting at home studying our Jewish text all by ourselves. Judaism is a communal religion, except we are living in this moment, going now into month number 3, in which we're not allowed to join in communities. I am a non-synagogue pulpit rabbi, which means I've got the luxury of sometimes sleeping in on a Saturday morning. And I sometimes avail myself of it. I will admit that in front of all 617 people here. But that's because it never occurred to me that there would be a time when I couldn't choose to roll out of bed on a Saturday morning and go to shul. And here we are living in this world where we can't be together. So are there Jewish rituals that have been sustaining to you during this time, or that you've heard about from other people you've been speaking to? How can Jewish wisdom help us to get through this until we can once again be together in those kind of vibrant communities?
Yeah, I love this question. And I just want to go back to the last question just to say, I think there are so many different ways to be a committed and engaged Jew. People often ask me, like, okay, what do I have to do? It's like, I am not the one to tell you. I think what you have to do is you have to learn a little something, enough about the various aspects of Judaism. And then you dive in deeply and seriously and meaningfully into those. So maybe you have a really great Shabbat practice. Maybe you have beautiful holidays with your family. Maybe you really learn about Jewish approaches to helping those who are vulnerable, and you take that detailed learning into your social justice work. So I want to be really careful about making clear that I think there are so many ways to be Jewish, but I think the really thin kind of surface, kind of like, I love the New York Times, that's not going to cut it, right? We got to dive in and really take what's there. As for your question, this is a tough time. I think a lot of people draw a lot of strength and connection from their Jewish communities. And so I think there's some amazing stuff happening online. I mean, I saw someone point out in the chat, like, and we're here tonight, right? Like, this is, it's not the same as being in person in a synagogue, but it's not, terribly different. Like, we're still having this connection and discussing these ideas. So I think that the online things are great. I've also been incredibly moved by how creative people are being. And actually, I wrote about this in a piece I wrote in the Washington Post. I heard about, very heartbreakingly, a man who had passed away from COVID-19. And, he was a beloved member of his synagogue. And, family couldn't have the traditional funeral, all of that. And Shiva, not doable now. But they came up with this beautiful idea where, traditionally, in a traditional funeral, at the end, the people who've come to attend to support the mourners, they line up in 2 lines, and the mourners kind of walk through this receiving line, and everyone in the lines kind of says consoling words and condolences to the mourners. And so they replicated this in the parking lot in their cars. They drove to the synagogue parking lot, people lined up their cars in 2 rows, and the mourners drove through in their car, and people were just like, waving. Some people stood outside their cars with their hands on their heart. Everyone's socially distanced. It was all very safe. But, and it's funny. I think that is just the most beautiful embodiment of tradition. that's such to me a model of how you do Judaism. They dug deep into the tradition to find out, like, what are these rituals that have been handed down to us for thousands of years? Why are they so important? And they figure that out for themselves, and then they figured out this very modern way to embody it safely. And so I just, doing things like that, I'm just blown away. I thought that was so beautiful and moving. And of course, I know it's not the same. I don't want to diminish at all the struggle that we're facing right now, but I really am in awe of people who are being so creative and thoughtful and just doing such amazing things to create community now, virtually and in cars.
Yeah, I think this is a good moment to give a shout out to the incredible team at American Jewish University that's put together this Biachad Together
Yes.
series that we can gather in the hundreds for this conversation and for more learning that'll take place tomorrow night and the night after and the night after. And the credit goes to a very small but very dedicated team of people who have made this possible. So thank you personally to all of you. And thank you, Sarah, for making yourself available for conversations like this. I know you're doing many of them around the country, and this is a great chance for us to get to learn. I want to pivot a little bit. We've been talking a lot about what Judaism can offer those of us who are born and raised Jewish who may not have fully accessed all of the depths of Jewish tradition. But as I'm scanning through the names, I run the Introduction to Judaism program at AJU, and I'm seeing many of my students here, and I'm looking and seeing that one became Jewish, and that one became Jewish, and that one became Jewish, and that one became Jewish. And we are not a proselytizing people. At least we haven't been in for 2,000 years, which is a very long time. But you said in your book at one point, sharing is different than proselytizing, and that this book isn't just for Jews, it's for the broader world. What's our message to non-Jews? And you keep people on message for a living. Like, how do we put out the word that we've got all of this amazing stuff in Judaism and it's available to people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we don't proselytize, because proselytizing basically means that we go to people and we say, you are not okay the way you are. You have to believe like us to be okay, to be morally acceptable, to be saved. I'm not comfortable with that. So I'm glad we don't proselytize, but I'm a very big fan of like an incredibly aggressive welcome, like really just welcoming people in who, whether they want to learn, whether they want to choose to become part of our people, however they'd like to be present with us. I'm such a big fan of welcoming people in. And I have to tell you, the Jews by Choice in my intro classes, they knew more than the people who'd been born Jewish. They were more committed. They had fresher perspectives. They were so learned. They just brought such energy and such a depth to it. And I thought they were the biggest blessing to the Jewish people. So I'm a very big fan of really welcoming in people who want to join us in any way, either by formally converting or being a passionate fellow traveler. Big fan of that. In terms of the message we have, I think it's important for us to understand kind of our core founding story, which is, I look at the Torah and I see the story of a God who chooses this sort of helpless bunch of people as a chosen people, rescues them from slavery, assembles them at a mountain, and basically offers them a covenant, which is, something that they have to either accept or reject. It has two parties, and it's, the Jewish laws. And basically the covenant, he says, is like, this is the mission I'm giving to you. I'm asking you to create a society that is the exact opposite of Egypt, a society where the vulnerable are cared for, loved, where they are the focus of concern, where abusive power structures are upended. It's to say to them, I want you to create a society that's the exact opposite of the one you left. And the Israelites have to choose to accept that covenant. And what I think that tells you about the kind of core moral orientation of Judaism, that our ambit of concern really needs to include those who are on the margins, those who are left out. They are very much our concern, because we were them and we always in some way are them. So that's really important. And I also just think this wonderful human responsibility. There's this, I don't believe in the Torah literally. I think it's metaphor. I think it's storytelling. It's people trying to kind of capture their experience of the divine. But what they articulate is a very empowered kind of human being, right? They articulate a partnership. They depict a God who wasn't asking for servants or robots. They portray a God who is asking for partners. And so I think we're really called to take great human responsibility to fulfill this this Jewish mission. And I'm thrilled for anyone who's just curious about Judaism, wants to learn, wants to join us in any way. I want to just welcome them in with open arms.
I was going to ask you, as we were starting to wrap up in the next few minutes, I was going to ask you for kind of a funny war story from your time in the White House. And we could all use a laugh, but in what you were saying, this message of caring for the vulnerable and being aware of all of those people whose society leaves behind, was there a moment working in politics, either for the Obamas or for Secretary Clinton or any of the people that you worked for, in which you really felt like these values came to life? A story that you can tell us that can leave us with a little bit of inspiration tonight?
Yeah, I really love to share the story of the final commencement speech that I wrote for Mrs. Obama, and it was at the City College of New York, which I was really moved when I found out she was speaking there, because when my great-grandparents first came to America, they had 4 daughters, and my great-grandmother was so excited that they were in New York City because they had the city college system that accepted Jews, it accepted women, and it accepted people who had very little money, and that was my family. Unfortunately, the family left New York, and my grandmother, who was one of those 4 daughters, she never wanted to go to college, which was just so heartbreaking to her. She wanted to go to college, she wanted to go to law school, and she wanted to go into politics. She never got the chance to do that. And so to roll up 2 generations later, with the First Lady of the United States, I have a college degree, a law degree, I'm working in politics, and what I was particularly moved by was the fact that this audience of graduates, they come from 150 different nationalities. They speak 100 different languages. A lot of them worked 2 or 3 jobs to put themselves through school. They commuted 2 or 3 hours a day from all over New York to make it there. And, this was a bunch of people who have really come up the hard way, who have worked so hard. They are this generation of striving, dreaming immigrants. And just to hear their First Lady saying to them, immigrants have always made this country great. Our diversity has always been our greatest strength. I think that message, just seeing the way that it moved people in the audience, feeling how much it moved me, knowing that 2 generations ago, it was so many Jews who were yearning to sit in those seats. I think that just that constant message that the Obamas had of, you belong here, this is your country too, the way they were always opening up the White House. They always wanted to make sure that kids who came from really disadvantaged backgrounds, that they could come to the White House too, because it's their house. Right? And that was the message. They said, I want them to run around like they own the place, because they do. And I think that constant message to people of all backgrounds, that they have a place in this country, it never ceased to move me.
What was Mrs. Obama's line about waking up every morning in a house built by slaves and watching her daughters play on the lawn?
Yeah, right, the arc of history, the arc of American history, I think is so beautifully captured in that image, right? Like that just, I just remember hearing her deliver that speech. It really filled me with hope about the potential that America has.
An interesting question in the chat, and then I'll have a final one, and we'll call it a night. Kathy writes, how has your spiritual growth impacted your experience of personal relationships? Do you experience a divide between you and people who haven't done this type of growing or exploring? I think many of us wonder or worry about going on the kind of journey that you described, because we wonder if it's going to separate us from our people or make us very different. Have you found that, or have you found the opposite?
What a beautiful question. No one has ever asked me that question, and I think it's really profound, because I think she's right. I do think there is an element. I'm not saying like, oh, I went on this journey and now I'm so deep and spiritual and other people are lesser. Like, that's not what I think at all. But I do think it can be kind of hard, because I think so often the image of religion and spirituality in America is either this kind of like hateful, bigoted, dogmatic stuff, or this like woo-woo, very out there, weird hippie stuff. And people don't realize that actually thoughtful, smart, mature people can learn a lot and grow a lot from experiencing this stuff. And I think sometimes I do detect a little bit of like condescension from some people, or some sense that like I've checked my brain at the door, or they don't quite understand what I'm saying, or they just seem kind of concerned about different things. And I do think I've seen my community has shifted a little bit, in that I think I've just really grown the part of my community that's engaged in Judaism, or spirituality and religion, even if it's not Judaism, in some way, I feel like I do kind of connect a little bit more to them. And I think that's sort of shifted my friend groups, but I still am friends with, my friends who don't like this stuff. And that's just not something that we talk about. But I do feel like that's a little bit of a loss, because it's a way that I can't really connect with them profoundly in a way that I can connect with others profoundly. So I think there is that loss, but I think that's true of any kind of growth or change that you do in your life. It does sometimes take you a little bit further away from some people, but it also brings you closer to a lot of people. And that's just, I think, the natural process of growth and development. But it's a beautiful question.
Yeah, and as I was listening to you talk, I love the point that you make about a challenging phenomenon in America, which is this sense that religion is an activity for the less enlightened, right? If you have multiple graduate degrees, who needs religion? This is a more this sort of flyover country mentality of, oh, it's for those people, but not for us. And I remember so vividly being a 17-year-old freshman at UCLA and going to my first Shabbat at the rabbi's house, Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller, who for 40 years was the director of UCLA Hillel and just this incredible scholar. And I came out of high school class where I was practically the only Jew, and I was sure that I was an expert in all things Jewish. And I walked into his house the first week of the first quarter of UCLA, and he showed me back into his library, and it was stacked with books floor to ceiling. And he explained that they had just finished reinforcing the foundation under the house, under that room in particular, because the weight of the library, the house was starting to collapse around it. And I realized in that moment, like, okay, I don't know anything. And that started me in my journey. As a 17-year-old with really unkempt big hair, and you had that moment of walking into an Intro to Judaism class and saying, I've been Jewish all along, but it actually turns out there's so much more here. And I really tremendously appreciate that what your book is doing for those people who haven't yet had that aha moment is inviting them to say, you do not have to check your brain at the door. You do not have to check your heart at the door. This is an ocean of wisdom that is a worthy one for smart people to swim in. And the depths are deeper than any of us are ever going to reach. So thank you so much for putting that out in the world. And I just want to show your book. This is here all along. This is my well-worn copy. And if you could let us know as we finish up where we can find this, because I think people who have heard you speak now are going to want to read the book, and also how you hope that will relate to this book that you put out in the world.
Yeah, so you can find it wherever you buy books. If there's a local bookstore that you can support, that would be great, especially at this time. But it's also available online, Amazon, all the usual places, and then you can get it in a hardcover, in Kindle, or an audiobook. And I actually read the audiobook. And I have discussion guides on my website, which is just sarahhurwitz.net, just my name.net. And they're really for people, I would love for people to talk with each other about this book. Even if it's just your partner or your roommate, maybe you have a tiny little book club where you print out these questions and you really dive in. So I would love for people to just discuss it with friends, family, and just use it as a reference guide. And it actually includes an appendix of resources at the back for if you decide, okay, I really want to go on a serious Jewish journey. I sort of curate what I think are some of the best, most helpful resources, not just books, but organizations, websites, experiences, ways that you can engage in all different aspects of Judaism. So there's so many ways to use the book, and I would just be thrilled if you wanted to buy it and check it out.
Wonderful. Well, I'm seeing many people writing into the chats, Sarah Hurwitz 2024.
That's very kind. I'll never run for office, but thank you.
I would back that ticket. I'd also be happy for you to be the vice president's speechwriter, but we can leave it right there. I want to thank you so much for being with us, giving of your time. I want to thank everybody who came to participate. We had hundreds and hundreds of people here tonight learning from you. There are many wonderful programs being offered through AJU's B'Yachad Together series, and I hope especially during this time of distancing, we will take the opportunity to come close and learn together, to learn from brilliant and interesting speakers like Sarah and many others. So thank you all for being here, and thank you particularly, Sarah, for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Adam. You were a wonderful conversation partner, and thanks to all of you for taking the time to join tonight, and thanks to AJU for hosting this amazing series.
It's a pleasure.